Chapter 1. My dream was to be a knight. Prologue. A flash of light pierced the air. Incrid couldn't comprehend what was happening. All he felt was a sharp pain, like a searing skewer thrust through his neck. He realized that the leather-padded armor he wore was utterly useless. As red-hot liquid gushed from his body, consciousness faded. And then, his eyes opened again. Another day had begun. It wasn't a dream. He had experienced it countless times already. He didn't know why it kept happening. It was simply the way things were. The clanging sound of a ladle banging against a pot signaled the morning. The night watch was rousing everyone awake. It was the third morning of the same routine. That's when Incrid finally grasped it. Again? Every time he died, the same day repeated itself. Chapter 1. My dream was to be a knight. Incrid's teacher, who taught him the sword, was a kind-hearted man who rarely uttered harsh words. You. The teacher leaned on his sword, still sheathed, standing it upright on the ground, and called out to Incrid. Go back to the village. If you hate farming, join the local militia. You'll probably end up as its captain. Had he listened to the advice of that seasoned veteran, things might have been different. But he didn't. The root of the problem lay in one comment he'd heard as a child. Enki, you're a genius. When he was 11, he effortlessly bested an older boy in a wooden sword fight. It was then, for the first time, that someone called him a genius. Back then, he didn't realize that the boy was simply terrible at swordsmanship. At 15, he defeated a village elder in a sparring match. The confidence this instilled in him was immense. In his small village, there was no one truly skilled in swordplay. The closest was a one-legged ex-mercenary who had wandered into the village. He taught basic swordsmanship to the local kids, including Incrid. You're a genius. At 15, Incrid heard those words for the second time. This time, they came from the mercenary, who claimed to have given up a knight's title and lost his leg for a lady's honor. I must be a genius, he thought. He dared to dream. He would become a knight who would serve a ruler destined to unite the warring continent. A knight who would bring an end to war. Around that time, a bard song spread across the continent, reaching even Incrid's remote village. The melody enchanted listeners, but the final verse stirred hearts. The knight who will end this war. The knight who paints twilight over the battlefield. We shall call him the Knight of Dusk. The Knight of the End. The bard song ignited the hearts of many young boys and girls. Incrid was no exception. I will be that knight, he thought. At 18, confident that no one in his village could match him, he left. He had no family, no parents, no siblings. He had a few friends, but his obsession with the sword had always kept others at a distance. Alone, he ventured into the world. Thus began his life as a mercenary. He wasn't bad at it. His dedication to improvement was commendable. But it took only 2 months for him to realize he wasn't a genius. Defeated by an ordinary, unnamed mercenary, he was told, "You're not ready." Believing a good teacher could make all the difference, he worked tirelessly, risking his life against bandits to earn enough money to enroll in swordsmanship schools in big cities. He learned diligently. He wasn't unlucky, his instructors were honest and fair. One advised him to abandon the sword altogether. No, I won't, Incrid replied resolutely. You're tenacious. I'll give you that, people often said about him. Hard work never betrayed him. His palms blistered, his arm muscles trembled, yet he swung his sword countless times. In circles of similar people, he stood out as an exceptional hard worker. By the time he turned 25, he had some reputation as a mercenary, enough that small-town folks might vaguely recall him. Still, a sliver of hope remained. Perhaps he could still improve. Then, at 27, that hope shattered. An altercation during a journey proved it. In just 5 exchanges, his sword was knocked from his hand, and a blade pierced his stomach. Pressing his wound, he asked, "How old are you?" 12. He couldn't believe it. This was true genius. Sorry, it was my first real fight, the boy said. He wasn't a noble or a commoner but a serf's child, holding a sword for only 6 months. Take this for your medical expenses, the boy's teacher said, tossing a coin pouch. The wound wasn't fatal, it hadn't damaged his organs. Still, Incrid pocketed the pouch. From age 11 to now, 16 years of relentless training had led to this moment, a 12-year-old defeating him. He felt a pang of despair but didn't let it consume him. What's the point of sulking? My limbs are still intact. Though he knew he wasn't a genius, he didn't give up. He continued wielding his sword. 10 years as a mercenary taught him that he could never be a great knight or swordsman, but perhaps he could become a skilled soldier. Quitting mercenary work, he joined the military, the best option left to him. At 30, he found himself in the Cyprus Division of the Kingdom of Norelia. 4th Regiment, 4th Battalion, 4th Company, 4th Platoon, also known as the 4-4 Platoon. Ingrid held the position of squad leader's deputy. Clang! 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 The night watch banged on metal, rousing the entire barracks. Damn, what a messed up dream, Ingrid muttered as he woke. What did you dream about? A subordinate asked lazily, pulling on his boots. My entire life. Depressing. As the soldier found a bug in his boot, he shook it out, crushed it underfoot, and spat on the remains. Ingrid got up, donned his armor, a breastplate with throwing knives embedded near the heart, arm guards, shin guards, and layered leather armor over thick fabric. The armor wasn't much against a sharp blade, but it was better than nothing. He prepared for another day of repetition. I heard the last squad leader had a dream like this before he died. Ingrid mumbled, recalling a rumor he'd heard. Does that mean it's my fate to die today? When one of his subordinates laughed, he smacked the back of the man's head. I'm not dying. Don't jinx it. He stood, poured water into a pot, and tossed in a few strips of dried meat. After that, he added some vegetables to make it into a simple stew. It was their breakfast. Any plans for combat today? One of the subordinates sitting nearby asked, and Ingrid shook his head. Who knows? He was just a lowly squad leader. Above him were 4 other squad leaders, reporting to a single platoon leader. And even that platoon leader probably didn't know much. Ingrid's swordsmanship was mediocre, and he wasn't a noble. That's why he remained a mere squad leader. But his experience on the battlefield far surpassed that of most company leaders. His subordinates respected him for that. So, when you were young, what did you want to be? One of his men approached him and asked casually. A knight. Would you hit me if I laughed? I won't hit you. Phut. You're laughing anyway? You little punk. Ingrid kicked the man in the rear. The subordinate pretended to be in pain as he replied, still, a knight, huh? What did it mean to be a knight? A knight was someone who could turn the tide of a battle. A monster who could face 1,000 foes alone. A hero who could slay hundreds of enemies single-handedly. Even their division was named after a knight, the Cyprus Division, named after Sir Cyprus. A knight as a dream, it seemed so lofty. That's a bold dream you had. Dreams are supposed to be bold, you fool. Ingrid casually gathered the dishes. Today, it was his turn to do the washing. In other squads, perhaps things were different, but in Ingrid's team, everyone shared the chores equally. Being a squad leader mostly meant receiving and relaying orders. Usually, the strongest fighter in the group would take the role. In that regard, Ingrid was unusual. He wasn't the strongest in his group. But he had the ability to unite people who had been cast out from other squads. That's why other squads referred to his team as the Troublemaker Squad 44. Ingrid was the leader of that Troublemaker Squad. Let me help you. Then shut up and follow me. Sure thing. His subordinate laughed. What kind of life had this man lived to end up here? Though curious, Ingrid never asked. His men appreciated that about him. He didn't pry into their pasts, nor did he judge their present. Nor did he demand much from them. Perhaps that was why they followed him. As they clattered through their dishwashing, his subordinate splashed water at the stream and asked, "Why did you want to be a knight?" The man had come to help but was now playing around. Should he say it was because of a bard song? Would that make him laugh? Ingrid thought for a moment before answering. I wanted to be good with a sword, and if I was going to do that, why not become a knight? A bit of a romantic, aren't you? His subordinate chuckled. Shut that mouth of yours. Was that why you practiced swinging your sword morning and night? Effort never betrays you. The countless hours of practice had left his palms covered in calluses. Even now? Do you still want to be a knight? Could he? Of course not. He knew that better than anyone. But he hadn't given up. He simply endured and kept moving forward. Ingrid understood reality well enough. But dreams didn't care about reality. They remained, even as they were torn apart. Once you're done washing, let's go. Got it. It was a trivial conversation. They returned to the barracks. Would they engage in a skirmish with the enemy kingdom? Or would they be sent to deal with the bandits who had been targeting supply lines? He didn't know. The air feels heavy. The battlefield air always did. But today, it felt especially so. The waiting was long. With nothing better to do, he considered practicing his sword but ended up taking a nap instead. Some days, you just didn't want to do anything. I can't do as much as I used to. He had worked tirelessly. And this was the result, a squad leader, no better than a third-rate mercenary. When the sun was 2 handspans past its peak, the squad leader finally called out. Squad 44, assemble. It was time for combat. The company gathered, forming part of the army's ranks. Ingrid's squad was no exception. A cold tension filled the air. Ingrid grasped a talisman hanging from his neck before tucking it back into his shirt. This is supposed to save my life. Nonsense, but soldiers often believed in such superstitions. For Ingrid, it wasn't belief but the memory of the old woman who had given it to him, her desperate tone convincing him to take it. It can't hurt, right? The reward for risking his life had been this flimsy talisman. He'd survived that monster hunt half by luck. If things had gone wrong, he'd have been the one to die. It had been a dangerous task, even for him. A small farming village, unable to pay, had begged him for help when he'd passed by. What a joke! Risking his life out of pity, what madness! But he didn't regret it. Because that's what knights do. Dreams might fall silent under the weight of reality, torn to shreds, but traces remained. He had wanted to be a knight. To be a hero of war. But now, he was just another soldier. Wah! A roar erupted. Ingrid joined in, veins bulging in his neck as he shouted. The opposing army surged forward like a tide. The setting sun painted the sky with a long streak of red. The two forces clashed beneath that crimson glow. Ingrid charged forward. Let's fight to live another day. His ever-smiling subordinate shouted as he rushed ahead. Soon, spears and swords collided, ripping through flesh and blood. Today's battle was hand-to-hand combat. Chapter 2, Lantern. Chapter 2, Lantern. Through the eye slit of a leather helmet, a black dot appeared to be flying toward him. Ingrid raised the shield fixed to the back of his left hand. Thunk! A heavy impact resonated through his arm. He had aimed to deflect the blow while striking back, but only half succeeded, leaving his forearm tense and throbbing. Ingrid slashed down with his blade over the helmet of the man who had lunged with a spear. Crack! The man reflexively twisted his neck, but the blade fell hard on his shoulder. The dull thud of the impact on his scapula sent a stinging vibration through Ingrid's grip. Ugh! You're dead, bastard, muttered the enemy, gripping his spear closer and swinging it in a short arc. It was a skilled move, well practiced. Without a second thought, Ingrid kicked the man squarely in the stomach with the sole of his boot. Ooh! The enemy staggered and fell, losing his balance. Close combat in a chaotic battlefield, it was a brawl at best. When the front lines of ally and foe collided, chaos ensued. Falling meant death, plain and simple. Ingrid turned his gaze away from the fallen enemy, gripping his shield's handle tightly as he searched for allies. Losing one's composure and charging blindly was a sure path to death. Imitating a berserker in the melee didn't make one a berserker, it made one a corpse. Why had Ingrid survived this long despite his meager talents? Because he knew his limits. Don't overstep, he reminded himself. A blade swung in from nowhere, and he intercepted it with his shield. The edge struck the rim of the shield, denting the iron band. The old wooden shield began to warp under the strain. At this rate, it wouldn't last more than a few more strikes. Keep attacks short and simple. After blocking, Ingrid tightened his grip on his sword and swung. Thunk! The satisfying impact of a solid blow echoed up his arm. An unlucky enemy crumpled sideways, his head struck hard. Before the fallen man could rise, an ally's spear drove deep into his chest. The thickly layered gambeson couldn't withstand the force of the spear's thrust, and the tip plunged inward, piercing the flesh. The wounded man thrashed, desperate to survive. Thud! 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 The allied soldier struck repeatedly, relentless and mechanical. Eventually, the spearhead punched through the armor entirely and buried itself in the enemy's torso. Goo! The man vomited blood, trembling as he clutched the spear lodged in his body. Let go! Damn it, let go, you bastard! The enemy clung stubbornly to the spear even in his final moments, forcing the allied soldier to discard the weapon and grab another from the ground. Satisfied with what he'd seen, Ingrid stepped back, catching his breath. Phew, phew, phew. He took in his position, the location of allies and enemies, and the shifting battlefield in his mind. Step forward, and you'll die. Charging into the enemy lines would mean becoming fertilizer for the battlefield, no different from the enemy with the massive hole in his abdomen who had just fallen. Perhaps that man had grown overconfident from cutting down weaker or less fortunate foes in previous battles. Or maybe he was simply unlucky to have crossed blades with Ingrid at the wrong moment. The ground was rock-hard from days without rain, resembling stone more than earth. Even though blood had been spilled over it, the dryness remained oppressive. The lack of rain had parched everything. The taste of blood rose in Ingrid's throat, dry and metallic. Swallowing thickly, he scanned the field for his squad members. Not that it mattered, they wouldn't be visible in this chaos. Instead, a scream erupted nearby. Ooh-wah! 2 steps away, an allied soldier thrust forward with his spear. What's he doing? The thrust was fine, but he tripped over his own feet, his right foot catching on his left, and fell flat on his face. Thud! The clumsy motion disarmed him, leaving his weapon scattered on the ground. Are you praying to be killed? The sight of the fallen man lifting his head looked like he was bowing in supplication. Shaking off the thought, Ingrid acted. He advanced, raising his shield and bracing his muscles as he held his breath. Thunk! Crack! An enemy blade crashed into his shield. The impact reverberated through his arm, spreading to his entire body. Though he blocked it in time, the oiled wooden shield splintered from the force. Ingrid hurled the broken shield forward, putting all his strength into wide, sweeping slashes. One from right to left, then another from left to right. Whoosh, whoosh. Clang! On the second swing, his blade caught the enemy's weapon. The clash sent sparks flying, and the enemy's weapon slipped from his grasp. Ingrid seized the opportunity. He didn't trust his mediocre swordsmanship but relied on the brute strength he had honed through rigorous training, more intense than that of most elite mercenaries. That strength had created this opening. Still, he didn't rush forward recklessly. In battle, opportunities often came with hidden dangers. Ooh-wah! Disarmed, the enemy hesitated before raising his arms and charging like a bear. Ingrid feinted a slash but instead threw his sword to the ground, crouched, and lifted the charging man onto his back. The weight of the man's armor, weapons, and body pressed heavily on his back. His waist and thigh screamed in protest, but Ingrid ignored the pain and stood upright with all his might. Ugh! The enemy flipped over his back and landed hard on the ground with a thud. Ingrid didn't look back. He knew his position was just inside the allied line, where 3 types of enemies typically appeared. The unlucky fool pushed forward into the vanguard. The overconfident idiot blinded by past victories. The true warrior who commanded the battlefield. The man he had just thrown was the first type, an unlucky fool. Ingrid retrieved his sword from the ground. Nearby, the clumsy allied soldier was picking himself up, his helmet split cleanly in half. Blood trickled down his head. Lucky bastard! Moments ago, he had almost died, only to be saved by Ingrid's actions. He even recognized the man. Belle, did getting your head split make you lose your senses? Ingrid asked. The soldier, Belle, wiped the blood from his face and grumbled, damn it. Barely made it out alive. If you're alive, watch my back. Ordinary soldiers couldn't grasp the bigger picture of a battlefield. Squad leaders like Ingrid served as intermediaries, relaying orders rather than commanding strategy. Yet, Ingrid could sense it. This isn't good. Years of blood and steel had sharpened his instincts, if not his swordsmanship. Something's about to go wrong. All right, Belle muttered, picking up his weapon. Taking cautious steps, he advanced 2 paces. Thwack! A flash of light streaked through the air and pierced his head. The arrow struck through the gap in his broken helmet, embedding itself deeply. The impact dislodged his eye, which rolled off and struck Ingrid's leather armor. Ah! Belle died without a sound, his lips parting in a silent gasp. Incrid averted his gaze. Far above, in the indistinct expanse of the sky, a fleeting flash of light caught his eye. In that instant, he knew. The next arrow was meant for him. Incrid closed his eyes. How many people can remain composed at the moment of death? Incrid was no exception. The moment he closed his eyes, fragments of his life, like the vivid details of a dream from the night before, surged forward. His past flickered by in the commonly described manner of a life review. Time seemed to slow. The noise of the battlefield faded, and even the sensation of breathing felt sluggish. Thump! Thack! That fleeting sensation vanished as quickly as it came. The life review disappeared, and the battlefield's clamor returned, along with the reassuring awareness of his own breathing. Praying out of gratitude for being spared. It was one of his subordinates speaking. One from his squad. The soldier had shoved him, causing an arrow to embed itself harmlessly in the ground. REM. Incrid called out his name. That damn Hawkeye or whatever his called is in this fight, so watch out for arrows. You think dodging will make a difference? I'll deal with it, so just hold on. This guy was also uniquely unhinged. Incrid thought so as he gave a small nod. You're not planning to give up on life, are you? I saw you skipping training and napping earlier today. REM's words jabbed at him. Are you regretting it now? I'd feel uneasy if I saved someone eager to die. Damn it, who the hell wants to die? Living by the sword wasn't the same as seeking death. You always fight just fine, but at critical moments, you close your eyes. You think I do that on purpose? He felt like he'd already responded to something similar earlier. REM held a battle axe in his right hand and a broken spear in his left. With his versatility in handling weapons, be it a sword, axe, or blunt weapon, this mix suited him. He scratched his helmet-covered head with his axe hand. Though, scratching his helmet didn't seem particularly satisfying. Damn, this helmet reeks like hell. Can't argue with that. Focus harder when it feels like you're about to die. REM's words were familiar. Incrid knew what they meant. REM often said, in those moments when death feels imminent, when your life flashes before your eyes, people tap into a transcendent state of focus. Use that in battle. Damn it, but was that even possible? That was talent, facing the brink of death with open eyes, staring down the enemy, and doing what needed to be done. Focus, my ass, Incrid muttered. Well, you'd figure it out after dying a few hundred times, but you've only got one life. Anyway, see you out there. REM chuckled and sprinted back into the fray. What a fighter. Incrid refocused on the battle. He fought with allied soldiers at his side, over and over. Incrid thrust his sword forward. If lucky, he'd skewer the enemy. If not, they'd dodge. And if neither? Thunk. The sword would land a blunt blow, unable to pierce the enemy's armor, merely pushing them back. HM. The struck enemy groaned and staggered back, only for a passing ally's warhammer to smash into their head. Bang! Incrid cleared his mind of distractions. The constant effort to block, dodge, and counter the onslaught of blades, spears, and clubs wore on his nerves. Without a shield, he felt exposed, so he picked up a fallen axe to use as a makeshift one. With his allies still nearby, he blocked, struck, and stabbed. When opportunities arose, he executed clumsy sword techniques he'd learned. Stepping forward with his left foot, shifting his weight, and extending his sword tip without losing control of his arm. A thrust. With just the right tension in his muscles, sufficient focus, and an eye for openings, it should have worked. Ting. TCH. Incrid's thrust only partially succeeded. Damn! He'd aimed for the gap between the enemy's helmet and chest plate, but they moved, and his strike veered off. A long gash appeared on their neck, not a fatal wound, though. The bloodied enemy locked eyes with Incrid. Their gaze brimmed with malice. They clenched their jaw with a grinding noise. Danger! The instinct honed on countless battlefields screamed at him. As Incrid stepped back, an ally filled the gap. The enemy crouched silently, striking the ally's shin with a weapon-clenched fist. Crack! A bone-snapping sound followed. Ah! As the injured ally collapsed, the enemy drew a dagger and drove it into the fallen soldier's throat. The swift stab-and-pull motion felt almost rehearsed, as if part of a grim play. Blood sprayed, staining the enemy's armor. They shoved the dead soldier aside. Ah. A fleeting life review. The boundary between life and death. Images flooded Ingrid's mind like an illuminating lantern casting shadows. Those shadows depicted his life. Like the dream he had last night. At the edge of it all, as everything slipped away, the enemy's blade drove into Ingrid's neck. The enemy had mirrored his thrust perfectly. A flawless strike. At least, it seemed so to Ingrid. As fiery pain coursed from his neck through his body, Ingrid faced the moment between life and death. He realized what REM's focus meant. But it was too late. Do you have to die to learn it? He silently cursed REM as his eyes shut. His thoughts wandered. Longing. Yearning. Desire. I wanted to master the sword. I wanted to be a knight. I wanted to be a hero. But Ingrid hadn't achieved any of it. He was destined for a modest life, earning enough to settle in a quiet village and live out his days. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to do that. The fire in his heart wouldn't allow it. To the very end, he spent every coin earned on the battlefield on training schools. I could have done better. If only he had more time. He believed that if he practiced more, sacrificing sleep and leisure like prodigies and geniuses, he could have succeeded. As the final images of his life faded, a face appeared, the first and only person he'd ever saved alone. The talisman will act on your wish, Sir Knight. It was a gift from the village elder, an old woman with missing teeth whose words whistled as she spoke. Regret and longing filled his heart with a new emotion, one he'd never felt before. Regret. Would things have been different if I swung my sword a few more times? The weight of death pressed down. Beyond his closed eyes, a black river loomed. Ingrid regretted taking a nap instead of training that day. Perhaps, if he had trained, his final thrust would have succeeded. A faceless ferryman sat on a small boat in the Black River. The ferryman asked, "Do you truly believe that?" "Who? You're amusing." "What? Then let's do this." The ferryman's voice seemed to come from nowhere. Beneath their black hood, where a face should be, there was only shadow. Ingrid couldn't say a word. He passed out and then opened his eyes again. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of a night guard striking metal. Or rather, hitting a pot with a ladle. The familiar sound of mourning. Turning silently to the side, he saw a bad dream who? REM, grumbling, pulled on his boots while sitting on his cot. Damn bug. A bug in his boot. Ingrid blinked. Everything in his dream had been so vivid it felt real. Spit. REM shook out the bug, spat on it, and crushed it underfoot. The ground bore the messy remnants of bug guts and spit. Chapter 3, a day. Chapter 3, a day. The same day as yesterday. Was it a dream? It felt so vivid, was it really just a dream? Ingrid was dumbfounded. Dream, or reality? The day unfolded almost identically, leading to the battlefield. Another skirmish. Fighting in a similar spot made the phantom of yesterday overlap in his vision, as though he were reliving it. Didn't this happen yesterday too? He shook his head to dismiss the thought. It must be a distraction. Just a dream. Perhaps he was lucky to have experienced a precognitive dream? Does that even count as lucky? He didn't know. He couldn't know. Ingrid was confused. Especially when the greased shield shattered. Damn, that was close. When Belle muttered those words, the feeling intensified. Belle, did getting your head split make you lose your senses? He reflexively repeated the exact words he'd remembered saying before. What nonsense are you talking about? Belle grumbled as he got back on his feet. Ingrid glanced at him, deep in thought. Belle was about to die. Should he just watch? And he did. It felt unreal, so he let it happen. A flash burst through, shattering Belle's skull. His eyeball popped out, striking Ingrid square in the chest. What's with the dazed look? REM saved him again. What? Have you finally gone mad? REM twirled his finger by his temple while holding an axe in his other hand. Today, that hawk-eyed bastard or whatever he calls himself is showing up, so I'm off to deal with him. Try to keep it together, all right? I swear, leave you alone for a second, and you'd be dead. Take care of yourself first. The word spilled out instinctively. REM tilted his head in confusion but walked off. Seriously, just focus already, he muttered before disappearing. Ingrid picked up a discarded axe in his left hand instead of a shield and gripped his sword in his right. He stood on the battlefield, feeling unsettled. As he endured, an enemy soldier closed in from the front. It happened in an instant. The man was skilled with his footwork. One of his swordsmanship instructors had once said that 70% of swordsmanship was in the footwork. The blade gleamed as it approached, and Ingrid once again faced the brink of death. In that fleeting moment, his focus sharpened. A dot appeared. The dot grew smaller, then suddenly larger. Ingrid watched it intently, right up until it turned into a blade piercing his throat. Ah! There was no scream, no groan. His neck had been impaled. A hissing sound escaped his throat as air leaked out. Agonizing pain spread from his throat to his entire body. Gripping his neck, Ingrid collapsed to the ground. Blood gurgled and spilled. "I'll show mercy," the enemy soldier murmured as he watched briefly, then plunged his sword into Ingrid's head. Darkness came again. And then, Ingrid heard it once more. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of a ladle striking a pot. "Why the hell do you look so out of it first thing in the morning?" It was REM, sitting next to him, holding his boots. Another day. The same day. Was that a dream? Did you have a nasty dream or something? Right. Just a dream. Ah, damn bugs. REM shook a bug out of his boot, spat, and crushed it underfoot. It was the third time Ingrid had seen that scene. He sat there, unarmored, staring blankly. This is a dream. The day began again. Bell died. REM saved him. REM left to hunt down a hawk-eyed archer. And a skilled enemy soldier blocked Ingrid's path. "Who are you?" Ingrid asked. The enemy didn't respond, thrusting his sword instead. That thrust, so precise and elegant, it always amazed him. Thump. His heart raced. His focus peaked. Ingrid could see the tip of the blade more clearly than before. He twisted his body to evade. Rip. The result wasn't ideal. The graceful thrust didn't pierce his neck but tore a deep gash along its side. Burning pain radiated from the wound, spreading through his body. Once again, he fell to the ground. Blood poured out. "I'll show mercy." The blade came down on his head. Clang, clang, clang. Ah! He woke up screaming. The pain was still vivid. He touched his neck. Nightmare? Did some witch take your virginity in your sleep? REM cracked a crude joke. There's a bug in your boot. Ingrid covered half his face with his hand as he spoke. The pain of dying was terrible enough. But what the hell was going on? He couldn't fathom it. What? How do you know that? REM shook the bug out of his boot, spat, and crushed it. Just did. Are you some kind of prophet? No. He waved the question away. Ingrid finished preparing for the day as usual but stopped before heading out. REM. What now? My head hurts. Sort out breakfast yourself and tell anyone looking for me that I'm in the barracks, unwell. Lazy much? REM chuckled. He was quick to laugh. If this wasn't a dream. If he was truly reliving the day each time he died. Was that even possible? Could such a thing happen? Ingrid needed time to process. He returned to the barracks, removed his gear, and sat down. He thought and thought again. How could this happen? What's the cause? A thought struck him, and he fumbled through his belongings. The necklace the village chief had given him was gone. Is it because of that? Desire? A wish? A blessing? No, could this even be called a blessing? It was just the same day repeating over and over. Even among the blessing class artifacts, Ingrid had heard tales, but none of them mentioned anything like this. Isn't this more like a curse? He rubbed his neck absent-mindedly. The pain was horrifying. Each death hurt worse than the last. The weight of his thoughts felt like it might crush his head. By lunchtime, REM brought him food. What's wrong with you? Are you really just slacking off? His expression suggested he didn't think that was likely. Ingrid was known for his diligence. Yeah. Really? Yeah. Ingrid nodded twice. Strange. Well, rest up then. There's a battle later this afternoon, so make sure you're ready. I'll cover for you until then. IEM left. Time passes. Yet, there's no way to organize his thoughts. This isn't something that can be sorted out by thinking about it. A shout pierces the air. The ground trembles. The battle begins. Ingrid had no intention of stepping out. If he went out, he'd die to that piercing strike. So he chose to endure. But he couldn't keep holding out forever. No soldier in a battlefield, even one in pain, could shirk their duty indefinitely. Everyone, gear up and move out. It's a battle. A sentry making rounds shouted the command inside the tent. Ingrid donned his equipment and stepped outside. The fighting began anew. This time, he stayed much farther back than the day before. Neither Bell nor REM crossed his path as he endured. Suddenly, the front lines wavered, rippling with disarray. The enemy's movement was unusual. The Allied forces were being pushed back. Before he knew it, Ingrid stood at the very front. And there he encountered that man again. Was it coincidence, or was it fate? He didn't know. But one thing was clear, no matter where he went on the battlefield, he'd either die or face this man. Thus, the question wasn't why but how. Not why they kept meeting, but how he'd survive. The piercing strike. The blade came flying at him. What was that technique's name again? REM had once insisted he focus on learning techniques, saying even mastering just one could save his life on the battlefield. He'd also told Ingrid to keep calm even if trapped in a monster's den. What Ingrid was attempting now was something REM had taught him. Something about a heart. The name flitted through his mind, elusive. But even without fully remembering, the technique shone once again. Ingrid noticed he was holding his breath as he stared at the incoming blade. Thump. His heart pounded. He analyzed the timing and angle of the blade as it approached his throat. He flung his body sideways, rolling clumsily across the ground. But he survived. His relief was short-lived. Thud! A blow struck the back of his head, followed by searing pain. His mind went hazy. He didn't even realize he had fallen. An enemy from behind had slammed his helmet with an axe. As he lay there, dazed, he looked up. I'll show mercy. The pisser stabbed him again. Thunk. The sound of hammers pounding echoed once more as Ingrid opened his eyes. Another day, another repetition. Don't think about it. Whether the talisman was a blessing or a curse, he wouldn't think about that. He wouldn't dwell on what was happening to him. He only focused on two things. Surviving the battlefield. And doing whatever it took to achieve that. There's a bug in your boot. Who? Are you a prophet now? What was that thing you tried to teach me before? Blinking, REM thought for a moment before replying. Heart of the beast. Yes, that was it. The heart of the beast. No mere human heart could remain steadfast amid the spears, swords, and axes of the battlefield. But with the heart of the beast, it was possible. So he must make it his own. REM's words resurfaced in his mind. Teach me again. What? REM looked flabbergasted. Ingrid understood his reaction. Once, he'd been desperate to learn, and REM, charmed by his enthusiasm, had been equally eager to teach. In the end, Ingrid had learned nothing, and REM had taught nothing. The training started with a simple principle: never close your eyes in the critical moment. But keeping your eyes open until the brink of death wasn't something just anyone could do. And merely keeping them open wasn't enough. In Ingrid's eyes, REM's skill surpassed that of most elite mercenaries. The core of the training was watching and dodging until REM's axe was already halfway through the neck. Let's do it. Train me. Ingrid's eyes burnt with determination. A fire ignited in his chest. Does it matter if this is a blessing or a curse? He had no talent, he knew that. And time was fair to all. Thus, a dullard could never outmatch a genius. But what if time wasn't fair? Blessing or curse, it didn't matter. This was a lifeline, a rope to pull himself forward. You've got guts today. Seeing you fired up like this gives me energy too, REM said, standing. Right after breakfast. Agreed. After eating and washing their bowls, they shared idle dreams of becoming knights. IEM laughed at the notion. Then came the training. You remember the method? Perfectly. The training had been so intense it haunted Incrid's nightmares. He could never forget IEM's axe carving through his neck in those dreams. Let's get started. The premise was simple. When the axe came to cleave his neck, he'd open his eyes wide and dodge. If IEM made a mistake, Incrid would die. That fear had once held him back. But now things were different. If I die, I just hear the banging again. It was a time of fearlessness. Incrid drew on the focus he had gained through countless deaths and awakened the heart of the beast. His heartbeat steadied. What once raced in panic now calmed, bringing tranquility. The beast didn't startle easily. The slowed heartbeat granted clarity and composure. This composure let him track the axe's trajectory. Dodging wasn't hard. His body had been conditioned through constant training. When the axe swung, he stepped back, his right foot retreating as he leaned away. The axe swept past his face. Have you been practicing in secret? IEM asked. A bit. Good. But your timing is a little early. Wait until the last moment. The training was about thickening the metaphorical hide of the heart. IEM swung the axe again. Incrid waited until the blade was practically kissing his throat before dodging. Ha! Even in my tribe, only a few could master this. Impressive. Morning training concluded. IEM patted Incrid's shoulder. Well done. You should handle average fighters on the battlefield just fine now. And those who aren't average? What are you asking? What happens when I face one of them? Are you seriously asking that? Incrid's silent stare prompted IEM to continue, though he looked bemused. You run. Exactly. You flee. Challenging someone stronger than you on the battlefield was lunacy. Survival required awareness of your own limits. And yet, what if I trained against someone better? You die 100 times over, and it still wouldn't be enough. IEM chuckled, shaking his head. Incrid, hearing that laugh, thought to himself. What if my life had just multiplied 100-fold? Blessing or curse, it didn't matter. If it's useful, I'll use it. That's how he'd lived so far. And that's how he'd keep living. Even if it meant confronting that piercing strike again. What better training partner could there be? The pain of death was excruciating, but the rewards were immense. For the first time in over a decade, Incrid felt the joy of growth. A sense of fulfillment unlike any other, a high-no drug could match. Chapter 4, Heart of the Beast. Chapter 4, Heart of the Beast. All units, assemble. 4th Platoon, gather. The platoon leader's shout echoed in front of the barracks. It had been a day filled with a sense of fulfillment, but as the day drew to a close, dusk began to settle. The sun was already descending toward the western horizon in the late afternoon. Simply put, this isn't something you learn through practice alone. Training 1,000 days won't make a difference. Yet, seeing what you've managed to achieve during training, it's hard to say you lack talent. As they moved in response to the platoon leader's call, IEM spoke with an unusual seriousness. Really? Incrid only asked in return. It was hard enough to believe the events unfolding around him, let alone that they would lead to anything good. And if word got out? Unless it was truly divine blessing, even a slight misstep could bring the Inquisition knocking at his door. Would a meeting with those Inquisitors end well? Not a chance. At best, it would be the stake, at worst, a torture party awaited. No one wants nails driven into their body or their fingernails torn off, not Incrid either. During his days as a mercenary, he'd seen many suffer unjustly under the banner of heresy. Some he'd even quietly helped, though it was dangerous work. If anyone had known, they'd have mocked him, saying he'd chosen his own death. It was that perilous. Still, he did it because it felt right. Without that, there'd have been no reason to live as a swordsman. What's with that smugness? It's irritating. Did you strike gold today? Planning to desert and keep it all for yourself? Don't you know that'll only bring trouble? Gold. He had found something better than that. Shut up and move. The assembly order had been given, it was time to act. Incrid wiped the sweat dripping from his forehead with his sleeve. If he put his helmet on now, it would stink to high heaven, but there was no time to wash at the stream. Standing next to him, REM wasn't even sweating. How could someone train and remain so composed? Ingrid, part of the 4th platoon, moved to his designated position. Will it work? Mastering something in a single day was a stretch, but he'd grasped some basics, thanks to the experience of being stabbed to death. We are. The platoon leader's voice rang out. Victorious. The platoon leader was an unremarkable but reliable figure, adept at following orders from above. The battlefield loomed once more as the sun dipped further west, twilight descending. Ingrid's heart trembled. Why? He asked himself and found the answer quickly: fear. He'd been stabbed to death 3 times now. That pain, that overwhelming dread, it wasn't something one could ever get used to. Ingrid rubbed his neck. Though unscathed, it felt sore, as if he'd swallowed a blade. What's the matter? Losing your head already? REM whispered beside him. Stay sharp. This is the battlefield, Ingrid said as he stepped forward at the command, advance. REM matched his stride. Tension stiffens the body. Didn't you learn from me to avoid that? He wasn't wrong, which made it all the more irritating. The heart of the beast. Few could truly learn it, even if taught. Ingrid suppressed his racing heart, aligning his breathing with each step. That's the way. Let's see you survive today, dreamer. Hearing REM's taunt, Ingrid resolved not to share his ambition of becoming a knight if he died again today. The battlefield beckoned once more. Hand-to-hand combat began. Another identical day unfolded, his 4th today. Ingrid decided against saving his shield from breaking. A shield's purpose wasn't to be preserved but to block enemy blades, spears, and axes. Saving it was laughable. Instead, his thoughts ran too long. Suddenly, something came flying at him. Without time to even cry out, he leaned back, thrusting his shield forward. Thud! A spear tip struck the shield's edge. Barely a successful block. His left shoulder ached. The spear carried weight and power. The enemy retracted and thrust it again. Normally, his stiffened body would have failed to respond, leading to a series of crises. But his calm mind allowed him to see the spear's movement. The thrust was twice as slow as the one that killed him. It was avoidable. Focusing on the spear tip, Ingrid tilted his head aside. Whoosh! The spear grazed his helmet. It was his first attempt at something resembling a stunt. The heart of the beast doesn't excite easily. It allows for minimal movements in evasion. This newfound composure gave him clarity. Ingrid saw the gap between the enemy's helmet and breastplate, a slit wide enough to expose the chin. Not much of an opening, but enough for a blade. He gripped his sword and thrust upward. No grand technique required. Squish! The blade pierced from chin to throat. Gurgle! The enemy spewed blood and bits of severed tongue. Exploiting a gap doesn't require great strength, a lesson his swordsmanship instructor once taught. Evade with minimal motion, and the rest becomes easy. It was an expensive training school, yet the lessons were few. Back then, Ingrid dismissed them as nonsense. Money well spent, he thought now. Short evasions followed by precise strikes were effective. He kicked the enemy's abdomen and withdrew his sword. More blood gushed from the hole under the chin. The soldier crumpled backward. You bastard! Another enemy charged from behind. Ingrid didn't rush to breathe or react. 6 steps. He counted the distance, slashing the straps securing his shield. Rip! Rip! 2 cuts freed the shield. Wrapping it around his forearm had been a trick he learned to survive, ensuring it wouldn't be easily dropped in chaotic skirmishes. But now, it was unnecessary. The enemy closed in. Ingrid hurled the shield. Thud! The shield startled the spear-wielding soldier, forcing him to pull back his hands, and the spear, instinctively. His movement slowed. For a moment, the broad shield blocked his view. Taking advantage of this, Ingrid sidestepped 2 paces left. Helmets protect the head but narrow peripheral vision. Ingrid had often lost sight of enemies abruptly on the battlefield. Now, he exploited that blind spot, crouching low and preparing to topple his opponent. It was the same thing he had done the first time he died. This time, however, he executed it with greater precision. He targeted the opponent's right side. Before charging, Ingrid observed the enemy soldier's grip on their weapon. The front of the spear shaft was held with the left hand, while the right hand gripped the rear. The soldier was right-hand. He noticed things that would normally be overlooked. A clarity of vision granted by his composure. These were techniques he occasionally utilized in duels or small-scale skirmishes, but rarely during the chaos of a full-blown melee. It was a form of insight honed through survival as a mercenary. A right-hand spearman would struggle to swing to the right with their spear. The soldier who had blocked his shield frantically turned their head left and right in search of Incrid. They were startled, understandably so, because their opponent had seemingly vanished. The enemy soldier's eyes eventually locked onto Incrid. While they had been searching and panicking, Incrid had positioned himself behind their head and brought his sword down in a diagonal slash aimed toward their chest. Thwack! The soldier's armor had a protective section covering the back of the neck. The thick fabric and the thin leather covering it prevented the sword from completely severing their neck. The blade lodged halfway into the back of their neck. Ugh! Goo! Ah! The enemy soldier's eyes widened in shock, round with disbelief. Blood gushed from the half-severed neck, spilling profusely. Even as their neck was partially severed, the spearmen reflexively swung their weapon. The shaft of the spear struck Incrid's right shoulder with a light thud. The impact was negligible. The soldier, half dead, had swung at an awkward angle, making it impossible to deliver a forceful blow. Incrid raised his sword and yanked it free. Crunch! It had been embedded in bone and required significant effort to extract. As the blade came loose, chunks of flesh and blood clung to it, dripping down. Surveying the battlefield briefly, Incrid picked up a shattered shield from the ground instead of his axe. He now had the luxury of time to make such choices. This is working. It was almost too easy. On a battlefield, it's rare to demonstrate even half of one's usual abilities. That's natural. How could anyone fight as they normally would in the heart of death and carnage? While some went berserk, most faltered. Until he experienced death 3 times, Incrid had been the same. But now, things were different. I can manage this. That thrust, perhaps it was something he could contend with. What Incrid did wasn't enough to change the tide of the battle. He was merely a single soldier fighting slightly better. There was no shift in the broader flow of combat. But for Incrid personally, this was a significant breakthrough. After dispatching a few more enemy soldiers in the same manner. Ooh! Bell stumbled again. This time, Incrid had enough leeway to pull him back to his feet. You okay? Damn it, there's a rock sticking out here. It was an open plain. It wasn't unusual for a rock to jut out. But Bell had tripped over his own feet. That made him the fool here. Get it together. Incrid grabbed Bell's hand and helped him up. Thanks, man. Without loosening his grip, Incrid tightened his hold on Bell's hand. You mind letting go? Bell muttered awkwardly. Through the split, blood-streaked visor of Bell's helmet, his eyes were visible. The glint was a flash, an arrow. The arrow pierced Bell's skull. Incrid knew this moment well. In the chaos of battle, spotting incoming arrows was nearly impossible. It was far too difficult. Incrid tried to pull Bell forward by his hand. Bell staggered, struggling to maintain his balance before managing to plant his feet. Thwack! Bell's head shattered. The arrow had smashed his skull. Blood splattered across Incrid's chest plate. As soon as Incrid saw Bell's head burst, he ducked. A chilling whistle passed just over his head. An arrow, no doubt. The arrow buried itself with a dull thud into the corpse of a dead ally behind him. You prayed to Lady Luck or something. REM's voice called out just as Incrid dodged. He hadn't been able to save Bell's head, but he had saved his own. Of course, if he hadn't, REM would have saved him anyway. It was the same as before time. Something like that. Incrid answered vaguely, earning a faint chuckle from REM. Through the gap in his helmet, REM's teeth were visible. For someone with such delicate features, his mannerisms and speech were rough to the extreme. Good for you. They say it's the hawk-eyed bastard who fired that arrow. I'm going after him. Better pray 10 more times to your goddess. Don't get yourself killed out there. I'll pray for you too. Much obliged. Don't forget this. REM tapped his left chest with his axe handle and headed back into the fray. He was off to hunt down the falconeye, or whatever he was called. Incrid nodded, hoping he'd be able to ask REM that evening whether the archer had been taken down. As REM disappeared, allies and enemies swarmed into the space he had vacated. The gap began to close, and Ingrid judged the battlefield flow as anything but favorable. He had experienced this 3 times already. The allies were being pushed back. But there was only one thing to do. Survive. Ingrid felt a peculiar thrill rising within him. It wouldn't be long before he encountered that skilled soldier again. And soon enough, it happened. That thrust once again aimed for his head. Instead of dodging, Ingrid met the incoming blade with his own. Clang, clang, clang. Sparks flew in the air. Their eyes met. You blocked that? The enemy soldier's gaze seemed to ask. You're pretty good, the enemy remarked, thrusting again. Once, twice, 3 times. The first was blocked with a shield. The second dodged with a roll to the side. The third was met with a counterswing. Ingrid's blade traced a short arc through the air. And as the soldier pulled their arm back, something struck Ingrid in the waist from behind. Thwack! Ugh! He bit back a scream. Another thrust came at Ingrid. This time, he intentionally shifted his weight forward, collapsing into a roll. The idea was sound, but his timing was off. Thud! The blade smashed into his collarbone, piercing through. It felt like a red-hot iron branding his flesh and bone. Goo! The pain was so intense he couldn't even scream. As he reached for the embedded blade, the enemy swiftly retrieved it. The blade was impossibly sharp, likely cared for meticulously. The withdrawal was accompanied by an even sharper agony. The pain turned his vision white. Ingrid clenched his teeth and turned to face his attacker. A hulking enemy soldier stood there awkwardly, holding a club. That must have been what hit my waist. I'll show mercy. The one who had killed him 3 times before uttered the word, raising their blade vertically and driving it down. That was the end. Darkness seeped into his vision as his eyes closed. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of a ladle striking a pot echoed again. The 5th time. Damn it. He thought he had it this time. What's the 5th time? REM asked from beside him. A bug's in your boot. Ingrid replied as he stood. He had died again, but he had learned something. After all, the lesson he'd paid for with gold coins at the training grounds was this. Nothing works the first time. So what do you do? If once isn't enough, try 10 times. If 10 times isn't enough, try 100. Ordinarily, dying once would be the end. Fortunately, Ingrid could repeat this as many times as it took. Chapter 5, Valence-style swordsmanship. Chapter 5, Valence-style swordsmanship. Huh? Who? How did you know? I'm not a prophet. At Ingrid's response, REM shook out the bug from his boot onto the ground and spoke confidently. Did you put it in there? I didn't. Sure. REM kept his suspicious gaze fixed on him. Ingrid didn't care about REM's accusatory look. That wasn't the issue at hand. He stomped on the bug that REM had dropped. Squelch. A distinctly unpleasant sensation spread from the sole of his boot. Ooh. Spitting onto the ground, Ingrid rubbed the remains of the bug into the dirt and said, Can you teach me the heart of the beast? Who? You remember that? REM straightened his boots and stood up. That's not something easy to forget. Didn't stop you from drowning your guts in booze, wanting to forget. Back then, he'd kept seeing the scene of his head being cut off by an axe in his dreams. Life felt unbearable. Can you teach me, or not? You're fired up today, huh? All right, let's do it. REM nodded. Jackson, can you handle morning duty? I'll take over tomorrow. Since they needed strength to train, wasting time on chores like cleaning dishes was unnecessary. Sure, no problem. Jackson, a squad member who was always cheerful and got along well with others, replied. He had such a mild personality that it was hard to understand why he was part of this unit. When Ingrid first met him, he assumed Jackson was some sort of mediator within the squad. Jackson casually dusted off his reddish-brown hair and stepped out of the tent. Watching him leave, REM snorted and blew his nose. That guy always gives me a bad vibe. It was true that if Jackson had been an effective mediator, Ingrid might never have ended up in this squad. Jackson got along well with other units but didn't get along with the 4th squad members, except for Ingrid. For some reason, Ingrid had a knack for earning his squadmates' trust. Whether it was because he silently took on all sorts of tasks or because of his mediocre skills that seemed destined to keep him as a low-ranking squad leader, even Ingrid didn't know. He just figured it had to be one of the two. REM headed out of the tent, and Ingrid followed. That guy feels off. Something about him doesn't sit right with me. You should keep your distance. And what about you? Ingrid only asked the question in his mind. Was this the same guy who broke his superior officer's jaw in his last unit, giving advice about keeping distance? REM might have been his benefactor, but to others, especially those from his former unit, he was a walking disaster. The first squad members glared daggers at him whenever they crossed paths. No one would warm up to someone who'd done that to their squad leader. Ingrid didn't argue. It wouldn't change anything. Time wasted arguing would be better spent practicing the heart of the beast. There was much to learn from REM beyond that technique. Especially since he's close with the first squad members. That makes it even worse. All right, if you say so. When Ingrid didn't respond, REM stopped in his tracks. What? Squad leader, you're acting weird today. Normally, you'd have something to say by now. That was true. Normally, he'd have remarked on how ridiculous it was for someone who broke his superior's jaw to give advice. Or maybe he would have suggested ignoring Jackson entirely if friendliness wasn't possible. Instead of encouraging them to get along, Ingrid preferred to keep people apart to avoid conflicts. That was his secret to leading the chaotic, death-laden 4th Squad. Nothing to say. Ingrid cut the conversation short. REM scratched the back of his head. Strange day, huh? They ate breakfast and made their way to a clearing outside the barracks. Training on the battlefield might seem odd to others, but for Ingrid, it was routine. Those who knew him wouldn't see it as anything unusual. Even passers-by didn't spare them a second glance. And so, the heart of the beast training resumed. Have you been secretly learning from someone else? Not that you'd have had the chance. I just practiced what I've been taught. Practice alone got you this far. Each near-death experience brought a new layer of understanding. Ingrid found it easier to focus than before. REM eyed him suspiciously but eventually shrugged. Fine. If you say so. Squad leader, you've got talent, I'll give you that. REM echoed a sentiment he'd expressed the day before. Talent? Who? That would have been nice. Moments ago, Ingrid failed to evade REM's axe again. The blade had stopped just shy of his throat. A mere flick of the wrist would have left a deep scar on his neck. That was close, REM chuckled. He seemed pleased with Ingrid's progress, his laughter tinged with satisfaction. Ingrid noticed it, too. What kind of trick lets you swing an axe like that? That axe strike just now, it was faster than the thrust that had killed him before. The axe blade had approached so quickly, it felt like it would graze his skin any second. Even though Ingrid didn't blink, he couldn't track its movement. Talent. Ingrid was reminded once again what an irritating bastard REM could be. He'd always been like this. If training were enough, everyone would be a master swordsman, wouldn't they? REM laughed heartily. Just as Ingrid had picked up on his satisfaction earlier, he now realized REM took delight in teasing him. He was an odd one. Then again, was anyone in this squad not odd? What if I train more? Work harder? Practice endlessly, even without sleep? Ingrid's question came out instinctively. It was a dilemma he'd grappled with for a long time. If he lacked talent, should he give up? Ingrid chose not to. Instead of giving up, he pressed forward. If geniuses could take 10 steps at a time, he'd take a quarter step at a time, but he'd keep going. Man, you really are strange today. Did you drink some potion of seriousness or something? REM chuckled, hanging his axe on the strap at his waist. No. Squad leader. REM's tone grew serious as he called out to him. Their eyes met. After a brief silence, REM spoke. If you don't sleep, you'll die. Thud. REM's words were followed by his cheeks trembling as he struggled to hold back laughter before bursting out. It was his answer to Ingrid's earlier question about practicing without rest. Screw you. Ingrid responded with the universal gesture of disdain, raising his middle finger. Rem chuckled and suggested they head for lunch. Ingrid didn't plead to learn more. You can't fill your belly in one bite, and he understood that truth better than anyone. After lunch, he reviewed his swordsmanship. Thrusting, slashing, and swinging, basic techniques of swordsmanship. After mastering these fundamentals, he learned the Valen mercenary swordsmanship. It wasn't subpar. He had invested significant time and money into learning it, far beyond what a handful of silver coins could buy. Valen mercenary swordsmanship. Though it didn't reach knightly levels, it was renowned among mercenaries, and Valen swordsmanship stood out. If categorized, it would fall under the Thelusian sword style. The original manner in which Valen used it was unknown, but Incrid had incorporated several techniques into his repertoire. He poured his effort into mastering them. After death, each day repeated itself, but the lessons etched into the body remained. The heart of the beast was not learned with the mind but ingrained into the body. This meant that what his body retained stayed intact. He pushed himself to exhaustion, wielding his sword until the calloused skin of his palms, already thickened, split open anew. Ordinary soldiers didn't use swords, spears were their primary weapons. His role as a squad leader granted him the privilege of wielding a sword. And Incrid had no intention of letting it go. He trained relentlessly. Despite the pain in his grip, he endured. Even as his stomach churned from undigested food, he persisted. He focused all his senses on the tips of his toes and fingers. Illusion sword techniques revolved around deception. They encouraged the use of any means to mislead an opponent. Some of Valen's swordsmanship techniques had already spread throughout the mercenary world, for instance, feigning a fall to deliver a surprise thrust. Call it dishonorable if you like. Why would survival tactics be considered disgraceful? If someone claimed knights wouldn't stoop to such tactics, Incrid wouldn't argue. They had their values, and he had his own. The half-day allocated for training passed swiftly. His legs didn't tremble. If they had, the daily physical conditioning he had undergone would have been meaningless. Incrid's legs were sturdy. A strong body is quite the asset. REM commented as Incrid returned. A messenger had just arrived. This was the 6th repeat of the day, and by glancing at the sky, Incrid could estimate the time. A body trained for over 20 years, Incrid replied casually, moving back to his squad's position. Make sure that sturdy body doesn't end up as just another training dummy, REM quipped before battle, his laughter ringing again. You're on duty tomorrow, Jackson added nearby. One seemed to mock him, while the other appeared resolute not to take cooking duty 2 days in a row. No matter the tone, both seemed to want him to return alive. See you later. The 6th day began anew, and Incrid killed enemies more efficiently than the previous one. The first enemy lunged, but Incrid tripped him and smashed his head with the shield edge. The second fell to a faint before being stabbed. Valen mercenary swordsmanship wasn't common knowledge, he had sought it out and paid to learn it. The wavering tip of his sword became a mirage, obscuring his enemy's focus. His efforts bore fruit. He felt the satisfaction of growth, a fulfillment filling his chest. Even amidst the repetitions, his progress wasn't negligible. Despite his death and resurrection, Incrid didn't squander a single day. Quite the opposite, he fought more fiercely, immersed himself further, and honed his focus. He lived with yearning and fervent hope, never letting opportunities slip away. And so, Incrid fought, cutting down enemies, striking, and toppling them. The repetition of battles granted him new experiences. The heart of the beast. He began to perceive what had previously been invisible. Eventually, he reached the moment where Bell fell. Fighting daily at the same location, he always saw Bell fall. He couldn't retreat or relocate at will. Recklessly crossing the front lines was tantamount to suicide. It was no easy feat to alter one's position on the battlefield. I'm not at that level. Incrid knew himself well. Though he had grown confident, he wasn't capable of weaving through enemy ranks or attempting reckless gambits. He couldn't yet foresee the flight of a seasoned archer's arrows. Thud! Bell's head exploded once again. Damn it! He had resolved to save him this time but failed again. Immediately, Incrid ducked. An arrow whistled through the air as if preordained, its piercing sound lingering in his ears. His movements were almost instinctual, as though he had anticipated it. You're sharp today, aren't you? IM commented as he approached. Go slit the throat of that archer. Was planning on it anyway. Stay sharp. IM departed, leaving Incrid to face another enemy. This time, a soldier thrust a spear at him. Incrid failed again. He evaded a club swung from behind but was struck by a throwing axe from another direction. It was infuriating. Morning broke for the 7th time. I put a bug in your boot. Ingrid told REM. Are you insane? No, I'm not. Staying calm in such situations, that's the heart of the beast, right? Teach me. When the day restarted, REM blinked, then agreed. Ingrid trained, practiced, and wielded his sword. This time, he didn't try to save Bell. To save him, he needed to predict the flight of arrows. If he couldn't, he'd have to rely on luck. How did REM dodge those arrows? With that question in mind, Ingrid moved his body. Another thrust led to his death. I'll show mercy. He muttered bitterly. That cursed mercy. And so he died. Through the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. Over 100 deaths later, Ingrid continued to repeat the day, always beginning with his death. Chapter 6, His grip should have been torn apart. Chapter 6, His grip should have been torn apart. Another repeating day. Ingrid spent each and every one of those days meaningfully. Not a single day was wasted. I'm an ordinary man. In terms of swordsmanship, he couldn't be called a genius or even a prodigy. He certainly wasn't a genius. After the 8th failure, Ingrid thought. I tried to finish a meal with just one stab of a fork. He was nowhere near being a genius, a prodigy, or even an outstanding person. Ingrid divided his work. I'll take half steps. There was no dull moment. The repeating days, and at the same time, his growing skill. It was like a drug. Ingrid found this situation thoroughly enjoyable. There are many good things. Above all, the best part was that he could constantly experience real-life combat. Moreover, it was a vivid experience gained at the cost of his life. Ingrid fully utilized that, and until he stepped onto the battlefield, he made sure to live each day to the fullest. He trained the heart of the beast. He learned a new style of swordsmanship. The repeating time made him memorize the events happening around him. A good example was the gambling scene in the adjacent barracks at breakfast. Damn it! You cheated, didn't you? Cheated? You're just unlucky, you bastard. It was a familiar morning sight. It wasn't cheating. After seeing it several times, Ingrid knew. The dice always landed on the same numbers, and he was well aware of it. He passed by, spending another day. Repeating. The endless battles expanded Ingrid's understanding. To be precise, the time to think made his mind broaden. I don't need to see the arrows to save Bell. That's something a top-tier mercenary would do. Ingrid cleanly gave up, and through that, he managed to save Bell. Bang! It was just a matter of getting a sturdier shield. The arrow lodged itself into the round shield. No matter how skilled the archer was, it was impossible to pierce the soldier's skull hiding behind the shield. Where did you pop up from? Bell, who had fallen, asked with wide eyes. When will you stop rolling on the ground? Get up quickly. Ingrid wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and kicked Bell's backside. Bell, who had his backside patted, once again headed towards the battlefield. If I save him here, will I see his face tomorrow? He didn't know. He was simply making this his first goal. The small goal Ingrid had set was to stir up the battlefield and save Bell. He achieved that on the 25th day. Wow! The mother of the monastery's here. When you have time, save me too, instead of wasting time on the other fools. REM suddenly popped up from behind and spoke nonsense, as usual. Every time Bell was saved, REM spouted crazy remarks. Ingrid played along with him each time. Mother referred to the nun in charge of the monastery. You're excommunicated. You're disgusting. Monasteries don't accept anyone who isn't a believer. Excommunication means being told to leave the monastery. It was a fairly high-level joke between Ingrid and REM. The filthy world that discriminates by appearance, ha! REM, as always, didn't back down and ran off. Ingrid knew he was off to catch that hawk-eyed fellow, even without being told. And yet, despite repeating 50 times or so, Ingrid couldn't defeat the piercing enemy soldiers. Though by chance, he had blocked multiple attacks, there were always those who came from the side with hammers, and his skull was crushed. There's no time to waste. The one who crushed Ingrid's skull spoke. Ingrid didn't even know how it happened. His vision suddenly spun, and the ground rushed up to meet him. He didn't even have the strength to shake his head. He only felt the sticky liquid running down his face. When he came to his senses, he realized he had dropped his sword and was kneeling. It must hurt. I'll show mercy. The blade quickly pierced his neck, and Ingrid had to writhe in pain. The blade sunk into his neck. The pain, something he couldn't get used to, spread throughout his body. The pain from the heated iron rod stabbing his neck ravaged his brain. As he died, Ingrid blinked. The world turned red because of the blood that had entered his eyes. Beyond that red vision, he could see the red eyes of an enemy soldier holding a sword through the visor of his helmet. It wasn't literally red, but that's how it appeared at that moment. A thin gleam of pleasure flickered in the enemy's eyes. He had died so many times that he could see the smallest details. That was thanks to the heart of the beast. That pervert. His intention wasn't mercy. He killed for the thrill of it. The enemy would always shove the blade into the neck slowly, savoring the last breath that escaped from the victim. Perhaps it wasn't even aware that it aroused him. Ingrid remained composed, even though he realized that. Having faced death countless times, courage naturally settled in his heart. That was simply how it was. And then? Where did you sneak off for a secret rendezvous? On the 86th day, REM suddenly spoke. Ingrid frowned at REM's words. What kind of nonsense was this? What? The heart of a beast. You learned it from me, didn't you? But you couldn't have trained like this on your own. The axe's blade had stopped just a finger's width from his eye. If it had been any closer, the shockwave alone would have damaged his cornea. Thanks to that, Ingrid's vision was obstructed by the sharp edge of the axe, with only half of REM's face visible. Yet, even in this situation, Ingrid's breath remained calm. It was the strength granted by the heart of a beast. The courage that allowed him to endure the coming pain. Ingrid stared into REM's eyes, which were filled with questioning, beyond the axe's blade, and thought. This could happen too. Through the repetition of days, the heart of a beast had been trained, and now, from the perspective of the person who taught it, it might seem absurd. He only realized this now because REM was always the type to speak without thinking. REM talked a lot of nonsense, but when it came to matters like the heart of a beast, it was a different story. It was something Ingrid himself had taught. Ingrid didn't make any excuses. There was no need to. After thinking it over all day, he could handle it in the next day that began anew. Thud. REM pulled back his axe. Ingrid's sight cleared. Not a single scratch marked his face. REM handled the heavy axe as if it were his own hand. He scratched his head with the end of the axe handle. I don't get it. I was wondering if you learned from someone else, not just me. Even as he said that, his face showed he wasn't sure if it made sense. Ingrid was the squad leader, and this damn squad would never listen unless he was around. He had never left the squad after learning the heart of a beast from REM. So, even if he wanted to learn from someone else, there was no time for that. REM had been watching Ingrid all this time. Maybe, if he had been standing guard and secretly learning, it might make sense, but that too was equally unreasonable. REM didn't know it, but somehow, it felt like there was an edge to his words. I faced death more than 80 times, Ingrid answered roughly, thinking to himself. He knew he couldn't teach REM the heart of the beast. There was no response that could completely resolve the question coming from that barbarian man. I can't just say that every time today repeats, I learn from REM himself and get better while dying in the process. But the question could be ignored. REM wasn't the type to press hard for answers. Indeed, that was the case. No time was wasted. All right, let's say that's true. Sometimes, even the goddess of fortune drops a coin or two without realizing it. A common saying to soldiers who survived by some chance. But does that apply when learning a trick like this? Maybe it doesn't. But it didn't matter if REM let it slide. Thanks to that, it's more fun than before. Your skills have improved. What have you been secretly doing? Doing things that hurt so much I could die. Ingrid wasn't lying. Yeah, a man needs a few secrets. That's what makes him a man. I know it. REM didn't even care about that. He just said what he needed to and picked up his axe again. One more round. REM, with axe in hand, asked. Ingrid silently grabbed his sword. If his first goal was to save the soldier belle who had fallen, His second and final goal was to kill the perverted bastard who found pleasure in every life he took. Preparations for that were already in place. That was how the 113th day of their battle came. The day for their match. Ingrid tightened his muscles, pulling his arm back. He stretched his left leg forward, aiming to step on Rem's foot. Rem, quick as ever, withdrew his foot, and seeing that, Ingrid twisted his body around his planted left foot and slashed with all his might. The foot was a feint. It was a move aimed at luring Rem to back off. Ingrid flexed his muscles, striking with his sword. In that brief moment, Ingrid saw Rem's arm whip around like a whip. It was such an unreal sight that even the axe in his hand seemed to bend. Clang! It happened in an instant. The axe's edge bent and shot up like lightning. And it hit the sword Ingrid was holding. The sword flew up. The sword slipped from Ingrid's hand, soaring upward, spinning in mid-air before falling with a sharp thud onto the ground. The sound was from the blade striking a rock embedded in the ground. Ingrid saw the sword roll across the floor. Let's see. Rem immediately approached and grabbed Ingrid's wrist. The shock from losing the sword caused his hand to tremble. Rem looked at his hand, clicked his tongue, and spoke. This should have made you bleed. What? If you're going to swing an axe like that, you should at least control your strength, and what is this nonsense? That thrust wasn't bad, but it wasn't quite right. I can't explain it well, but that should have torn your grip open. You shouldn't have lost the sword. You mean I should never release my sword, even if I die? Ingrid raised his voice as Rem held his right hand. He had heard that many times from his swordsmanship instructor. Counting the days that pass is a hard task. Ingrid remembered it by making small changes to the start of each day. Since he was always good with his memory, it helped a lot in swordsmanship. It hadn't helped much until now. But now, it helped. Especially when he recalled the teachings from his instructors. He spoke with that memory in mind. That's nonsense. If I need to, I'll even throw the sword at my opponent's face. This is... let's keep it simple. What was your target with that thrust earlier? Ingrid couldn't immediately answer. That thrust was his trump card. It was a technique he had stolen after being stabbed in the neck more than 100 times by enemies. He had stolen and mimicked everything, from the posture to the placement of the feet, the shift in weight when wielding the sword, the movement of the muscles, the direction of the toes, and even the way the hands gripped the sword. That last strike, on the surface, it seemed fine, but it's hard to explain. Look here. Rem lowered his axe and drew a large circle in the dirt. It was about the size of a human head. Let's say our target is somewhere here. Saying that, Rem spun the axe around the circle and marked a spot with a tap. But actually, you're going for here. At first, Ingrid didn't understand what Rem was talking about. But somehow, thanks to the time he spent learning swordsmanship, despite the clumsy explanation, he understood it instantly, as if it were a sour pickle wrapped in a sweet fruit. Target point. What had been hidden in the thrust he made earlier? Had he wanted praise for doing well? Did he want to acknowledge that he had some talent, even just a speck, for mimicking? What was the point? What is a sword for? To slash and pierce, it's a weapon for killing. Among those, thrusting is the basic technique for targeting a single point. Especially in fencing. There are knights who specialize in using thin blades to pierce through the gaps in armor. I really can't explain it anymore. I thought you'd obviously dodge or block, so I let the sword go easily. But that thrust earlier had to be perfect. It had to say, I'm going to pierce you. You can't dodge. It needed to be shown clearly. After saying that, Rem seemed to reflect on whether he explained himself well. Being the type of person who does things at his own pace, explaining things wasn't his strength. But if the other person understood, then even a dog's barking could be a great explanation. For Ingrid, it was a great explanation. Because my sword lacked certainty. The thrust from earlier had been a second-rate mercenary strike. On the 123rd day, Ingrid realized it. And by the 124th day, Rem's lightning-quick axe strike had torn through Ingrid's grip. It wasn't just torn, it exploded open. Blood poured from his hand. Seeing that, Ingrid smiled. Because he had achieved what he wanted. Are you completely insane now? Don't you know that the most dangerous thing on the battlefield is a mad ally? No, why do you keep laughing? REM, seeing it, showed rare signs of panic, but Ingrid couldn't hold back his laughter. Shit, stop laughing. You really are a crazy bastard, huh? Seeing that, REM spoke. It was the 124th today.